first GIT instructor hired, because I was talking to Howard. Going on here? Something. We're talking about GIT in the mid 70s, and he dragged me to LA in 77, and off we went. And I was joined by two other guitar players that I didn't know about, Ron Ishte and Joe DiOrio, which opened my eyes. I thought, wow, where do I sign up to go to this school? Hell with teaching here. I need to, these guys were fabulous. So the three of us, which we always referred to ourselves as the Three Musketeers, uh, plowed our way through the first early years of GIT with the new ideas and new curriculum. And it was a crazy, wonderful, wonderful time. Um, I, I, I grew up, I'm a Beatle baby, probably like half of you guys. I just still marvel at the Beatles. And that led to, I got to play guitar. I want to play guitar a little bit better than the Beatles. So where do I look? Well, there's Eric Clapton and Hendrix. And so I was a rock guitar player through my teens. And but then there was a guy named Mike Bloomfield that really attracted me. Not only was he not a crazy English rocker with all the fancy clothes like Hendrix, he was just a down to earth guy. And I felt I really identified with that. And I loved his playing. Just Mike Bloomfield with that 59 Les Paul, forget it. It was everything I ever wanted. And he played things that to me sounded like jazz. I don't know if they were. I've never figured it out. I think a lot of people have kind of marveled at that blues, blues, blues. And what the hell was that little thing? Back to blues. So he turned me on to listening to other records. And fortunately, I had a friend that had a lot of jazz records, and he handed me a stack of albums of all kinds of jazz people. I knew about Howard Roberts. I knew about Wes Montgomery, but Attila Zolar, there was a number of guys that I started listening to. And instead of improving my blues playing, that was my plan, is just to play my Les Paul just like I just be a Mike Bloomfield copy and add these jazz ideas. I got dragged into the whole jazz guitar thing. I've got an archtop guitar, heavy guitar strings, and it was Barney Kessel and all of them. I mean, it was and I just sat and copied it whatever I could. In those days, it was record albums, and fortunately, I had a big reel-to-reel recorder that could play things at half speed or half speed of that. And I just would sit with my George Benson albums or my George Benson live albums. And in fact, I got in trouble a few times for dragging my cassette recorder into clubs back in the day in the mid 70s. But I used to record everybody. I have a gold mine of live players, especially Benson or Pat Martino, because I would go every night and I would record the entire thing. So I have the same tune Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I would put that on my reel to reel and try to copy the riffs and the ideas. And, that's just like. And when I met Howard, I first was just asked to sell books for him. I was a book salesman, and I went to a seminar of his in San Francisco. He heard me play, and he thought, "Well, this guy's got something going on. I don't know what. He's a weird guy, but." And I said, "Well, let's do a seminar in Seattle. I'll get a bunch of guys," because I did have a bunch of students. He said, "Okay, you put it on. I'll be up there. You just tell me when it is." Came to Seattle. We became good friends, and that's kind of the beginnings of GIT. And he talked about, how do you feel about a vocational school, like a welding school for guitar players? And I said, wow, it'd be great. He says, well, we're thinking about doing it in California. You want to come and teach there? And of course, I'll do it. And that led to my career. I mean, it was wonderful. And all through the 80s, GIT was my life, even though I ended up commuting back and forth to Seattle quite often in those days. But man, the students alone were spectacular. I probably learned more from students. I mean, in comes a guy from Australia, a guy named Frank Gambali, into one of my classes, and he gets up and starts playing, and I just stunned. Another guy that moved in with me lived in my house in North Hollywood, had a beagle, and that's why I had a beagle. And I figured a guy with a dog, I'll live with him. His name was Scott Henderson, and Scott and I had a wonderful time with our two beagles. And I can't give enough credit to the wonderful graduates. They're the ones that made the school. They're the ones that I probably learned the most from, and they're the ones that I became the closest friends with. Besides Joe and Ronnie and some of the teachers that came along. I mean, Joe DiOrio, forget it. This thing isn't big enough to handle Joe DiOrio discussion, but Joe's know-how and his words of wisdom found their way into it. I'm sure this new book is loaded with Joe DiOrio influences, and I credit him every day. I'm sure Tim feels the same way, and there's so many players. So that's kind of my life. I got into we got into publishing. I worked with Roger Hutchinson, my partner, REH Publications. It just so happened I had a knack for video because we'd done so much video at GIT. I knew how to run a camera. I knew how to turn a VCR on, and so I took charge of producing videos for REH. In fact, the very first video was shot right here in my basement. Robin Ford playing the blues right there. And then my video. And we did about 10 of them here until we realized that we needed a bigger place and we needed to use two cameras. But it evolved into working for Warner Brothers, Hal Leonard, and I think I produced far over 100 instructional guitar videos, and it was a lot of fun, and I could tell stories. Please let me tell an Yngwie story. I just dying
Oh,
to
Yngwie
get
stories are the best. They are okay.
to get even with him. No, I can't. He'll probably
Oh,
sue me
you
or
have to
something.
now.
Oh,
You can't.
come on.
All right, so we're doing Yngwie. We're down in LA. I'm directing it, and he's not the teacher. Boy, could he play! He was shocked how good he could play. But teaching, he sucked. Sorry, Yngwie, but you couldn't teach your way out of a paper bag. So I'm having to stop him and say, okay, Yngwie, that scale you just played, it's not a harmonic minor that you said. It's actually a kind of a hybrid melodic minor. And he goes, oh, you fucking GIT guys, you all think alike. And he threw picks at me all the time. He'd get mad and he'd flick these picks at me. I think he hit me a couple times in the head. And he was just hilarious. Thankfully, my good friend Steve Travato was also there backing me up. And so Steve kind of made the day. We got through it without too much trouble. So many of the great players that we all admire, I got a chance to work with in the studio. And, their knowledge, it makes total sense. They're about playing. They're about playing music. They weren't about studying music or writing books about music. They were players. Alan Holdsworth, he didn't know anything about what things were called, but a marvel, an absolute marvel as he sat there and would play these examples. So I don't know what this is called, but it's this. And you just go, wow, I don't care what it's called either. I want to be able to play that. That's cool. So that was a really learning time for me, was directing and producing these different players. Some were golden teachers and some were just natural. I mean, the best guitar teacher in our repertoire, and you'll know the name, is Keith Wyatt. Keith he became one of our directors and a fabulous blues guitar player. But Keith can turn it on in front of a camera like no one I'd ever seen. And one take, can you explain a 6-note blues scale, Keith? Go. And you'd get 10 minutes of this beautiful, perfect thing. So, plugs to Keith if you're watching, Keith. I love you, man. And you were always one of my favorites. Okay, I'm going to
What
move on. Luke,
what a who's who. We have Robin Ford, Scott Henderson. It's really interesting because I think subconsciously, so I've known about Don via the internet since I was about 14, and I think I maybe even modeled my career on him in that I'm just working with these guys and kind of being this translator of helping them educate. Sometimes I work with people that have it all taken care of, but I think you maybe helped get rid of that stigma around teaching, because I think that's there no matter what. That kind of those that can't teach, that kind of thing. And anyone who's seen Don play, I know a lot of you will have seen the twin neck synth video. I got tons of emails about that. Know that Don really can play as well as teach. So I think you've been a big inspiration to me as far as my career goes. So thank you for that. And I think we all owe you a thank you for what you've done for institutions like GIT and the way you pioneered home video guitar lessons. So he mentioned REH, which I'm sure some of you would have seen clips from, and even Brett did an REH video. I'll get to Brett in a second. So thank you for that. Before we move on, I will just say these comments on YouTube you can't see, but we've got people who are going, I studied a bit with you at GIT in '88. You changed my world. I have now been a teacher there since 2006. That's Jeffrey Marshall. So you've got a presence even to this day through the people you've taught, and they're carrying the baton for you. We'll get to Brett, and then we'll get to some arpeggio stuff. Brett, what you've not met Don before, but you did a video for him, and you did some stuff at GIT. But I think we'd love to hear a little bit about your background and coming up in Australia, your Frank Gambale stories, or any Yngwie stories that you've got.
Look, for a start, I'm here as a student, so I don't want anyone to think I'm here to talk about me. But that Yngwie, someone did. Was it Steve Travato that did the Yngwie video edit, Don? Because it went around the school. I never saw it, unfortunately, but apparently it would get put on in classes, and it was hilarious. And like I said, it's the same thing. No disrespect to Yngwie. Like, I mean, he's a monster, and I love him, but you're right. Like some people they should just play, but communicating ideas isn't their strong point. And that was when I eventually found you on YouTube. Thank goodness for YouTube, because like I said, I never got to meet you while I was at GIT. But Scott Henderson would talk about you all the time, and often like cite you in his classes and say, here's a line I got from Don Mock, and they were always enthralling lines. Like, I mean, every time he played something that he said he directly took from you, it was just it was just gripping. You had to, like, where did that come from? And I had students that would come in and play things for me, and they'd say, this is a Don Mock idea, and I'd be like, you're kidding me. And then eventually I found the instructional videos on YouTube, and oh man, yeah. I mean, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here and to have you talk us through this book. I mean, I'm afraid it's way above my pay grade, but like I said, I'm here as a student, so I'll leave it there.
Thanks, man.
So for those of us, for those of you that have joined us late, Don's given a quick message of get your prostates checked. Don can't play at the moment, so we've hired the wonderful Brett Garsed to come in and be our finger muscles, I suppose. So we'll be putting you on the spot and throwing you under the bus and making you do all this stuff.
You can't do that to me. I can't do that. So.
Don't worry, we'll be nice. So now that we'll start getting into the arpeggio stuff. The most important thing I can tell you guys is don't wait for an opportunity to ask a question. The moment something's mentioned or the moment you get an idea, whack it in the chat, and I will save them for later, because we might not have time to get to them, or you might forget or whatever. So get those questions in as early as you can. I think the best place to start, Don, is obviously we've got your new book out, Arpeggio Alchemy, which is you have the award for our thickest book to date, which I expected no less from you. Now, your arpeggio approach, or your playing being more arpeggio based than scale based. Can you give us a bit of a background on how you came to that kind of style of playing and or why you like it?
Well, let's go back to 1977, and that's when I wrote my first book, Artful Arpeggios. Artful Arpeggios was just a basic book, short. We didn't even have an audio with it originally, and it was just some of the basic patterns, but 2 octaves. Bottom string up to the top string, so the 2 octaves, 2.5 octaves long, basic diatonic arpeggios, major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, minor 7, flat 5. I think maybe a diminished and augmented and some triads, and that was the book. And we had these little diagrams that Roger Hutchinson tediously made by hand because back then no computers, and people could see the patterns in which I was in. That's what I wanted them to see. And so it was just a book about the obvious patterns. There's a couple, you only have a couple of them for each chord type, but it was also the background of it. Punchline was really about chord substitution and how you can superimpose a basic arpeggio over a basic chord. You don't have to learn an arpeggio for every chord. And that came out of there was a teacher in Seattle, Tim, you probably would know who I'm talking about. Wonderful guy. He was the standard from the 60s into the 70s. And all my new students, I was the young, hot fusion guy in Seattle in the mid 70s. And I was getting a lot of students, but all these people had studied with him. And he had them learning arpeggios for almost every chord, major arpeggio, a major 6, major 7, major 9. And I'm shaking my head going, what the hell? I would never use those. Why? And I noticed in books, clarinet and saxophone, they would have arpeggio studies that had 5, 6 note arpeggios. And I'm going, it doesn't make sense. And so I became, of course, I'm listening carefully now to guys like Pat Martino and George Benson. And I'm not hearing anything other than major 7, minor 7, especially Benson, minor 7. But he would play it over the coolest situation. He'd play it over an altered dominant chord. So how come he's playing that same lick, but he's moved it and he's getting this most amazing musical idea just by simple graphics, by the sheer slide rule of the guitar fingerboard. And that locked me on to my future with arpeggios and scales. And so Artful Arpeggios book sold really well. It's still out there. I'm amazed. But what I noticed, I was a young player then, a teacher. As the couple of years went by, I noticed that even myself, when I go to play, improvise, I get on stage, I was hoping and assuming that because I practiced these things up and down, really fast, maybe with some sequences, but I could play them really fast. I figured once I got on stage, lightning would strike, creativity would strike, and suddenly I could create music. Well, no, it didn't work that way. I got on stage and I played the same things I played in my bedroom, faster than shit, as fast as I could play them, but I didn't play anything different. And that's a huge lesson. You're only going to play what you practice. Don't count on the ghost of Miles Davis coming down and visiting you on stage. It's not necessarily going to happen. You have to understand that you're practicing a tool. Yeah, you want to develop the technique. You want to be able to play the thing. But if you just start at the bottom of a scale or an arpeggio and run to the top, turn around, go back down, and you sit in front of the television and do that thinking that, okay, I got this down. I'm going to really be able to play now. It's a false idea. So by the 80s, I started changing my approach to teaching arpeggios to, wait a minute, the cool arpeggio ideas I'm hearing, Charlie Parker and Miles for that matter, Coltrane, they're not big runs. Sure, there's lots of those and they're cool and we all want to do it. You want to do 3, 4 octaves from top to bottom. There's a time and a place for that. But the cool arpeggios were little baby ones, 3, 4 notes connected to another baby one. and maybe a scale tone, and then another little arpeggio. And so, ding, the bell went off. I said, okay, I apologize to everybody that bought arpeggios. I got it wrong. You need to learn single octave arpeggios all over the fingerboard. And there's not that many. It's not that hard. It's only like 4. For a major 7, you learn 4 or 5 patterns, but one octave. So that's what this book really began as, is I'm going to, because I had a sheet that I would pass out to GIT students. We're just going to do little simple 1 octave shapes. And, the book's pretty complicated. It looks complicated, and I apologize for that. That's my style. But the pattern, because I have alternate fingerings. I think I blame Pat Martino for that. Pat always would have these examples where he would start with his little finger and then start with his third finger and second finger, first finger, and play the exact same riff, but he could do it starting on every finger. So I thought, well, maybe arpeggios you could do that too. But so that's really the foundation of the book, and suddenly the substitutions ideas started to really blossom as I went along, and so you'll see some pretty scary titles. Connecting arpeggios, symmetrical arpeggios, harmonized arpeggio lines, horizontal arpeggio, diatonic, major minor combinations. The combinations is the one thing I would like you to really pay attention to, because the combinations are the cool factor. That's where you would look at a chord like A minor 7, and you have a little grouping of arpeggios like A minor 7, C major 7, E minor 7, G major 7, and they're all they're living right together there because you worked on them right there. And so when you're playing on A minor 7 at the 5th fret, you not only know the scale, but you have this army of little friends of arpeggios that you can connect together. You can go up 1, you can go down 1, and you can add a chromatic tone, and that's it. So the book kind of came out of that, and as we go along, I'm sure we'll talk about some of these crazy chapters that I came up with. But don't mind me. I come up with weird, wacky names for things, and people take it too seriously. But that's it. Luke, back to you, please.
Nice. Awesome. So you actually answered someone's question. Someone was asking about the difference between this and artful arpeggios. And yeah, so this book is all about application, and I think that's where I'd like to start my questioning. It says the art of arpeggio superimposition. I think that's going to be a new term for some people. The first question is the simplest one. Is there a difference in your vernacular between superimposition and substitution? Are they the same thing?
Same thing. Absolutely the same. It's just chord substitution. It's
Cool.
just chord. The more you learn diatonic harmony, you learn that C major 7, E minor 7 are similar, and E minor 7 arpeggio gives you the sound of a C major 9. So why would you learn a C major 9 arpeggio when all you got to do is go and play E minor 7? You got a bass player hanging on to the C note for you. You sound like a genius. And all of these extended and altered arpeggios can come out of that, where you don't bother learning. Don't sweat about some kind of scary altered arpeggio. Unless it's cool, let me know about it. Teach it to me. But otherwise, the harmless little arpeggios. I mean, Pat Martino proved that by over an altered G7 chord, in some ballad. He'll go up a half step and play A minor, and he'll play a nice, happy A minor 7 arpeggio within the lines that he's playing. I'm not going to say there's just arpeggio. A lot going on there, but the presence of that sound is right there, and you go, oh, he must know some really exotic arpeggio scale. No, Pat didn't, not in the least. He just knew this sound fits over this sound. I'm not even sure what this is called, but it doesn't matter. And I think Wes Montgomery was the same way. He didn't care about what it was called. This sound, if I move it up here and play it over this sound, this chord sound, it's cool. Sounds musical. We hear it and we go, oh my God, he must have went to Berkeley for 10 years to learn how to do that. Nah, chord substitution in its basic form. Learn it, and the world is yours.
Awesome. So I got to work with Don on the book. So if I'm reiterating him, it's just because these were the big moments that I had that I realized when working on it that I really want to be the takeaway points. The whole concept is you don't have to go down the rabbit hole of all these different crazy arpeggio and 13th arpeggios because you realize that you've traveled the whole neck and you've got nowhere else to go. But you can use these simple 4-note structures and or even triads. You talk about triads, arpeggio, triad superimposition. You can use smaller structures that are more manageable, easier to hear, easier to create logical sense with, and be familiar with because you're dealing with less things. You could use those to create all kinds of advanced, interesting, and melodic ideas. On that, Brett, I've just realised we haven't done a sound check, so I'm going to throw you on the spot in a second. Are you able to get yourself set up to, and we'll chuck some ideas your way to see if you can pull it off, or maybe if you've got a minor 7 groove backing track, and we'll throw some substitutions at you to just hear how they sound.
Oh wow, a minor 7 groove backing track.
Well,
Sorry.
I can send you something.
I've got you know what? I've got my old favourite
The E minor G.
7, the E minor thing. Yeah, let me see if I can just dial that up real quick. You know, the fact we haven't done a sound check is probably nature's way of saying maybe I shouldn't play, but
I think it's just.
You're my hands and fingers here. You gotta come through.
Oh no, you can't do that to me. But anyway, I'll represent the rock guitar coalition here of the completely untrained musician, desperately trying to.
He's being humble, everyone, but he's literally the only person I could think of asking to do this job.
I'm not being humble. I'm just keeping it real. But
okay, so what would be a cool place to start is really simple. You've got all these crazy chapters and everything, and all the diatonic triad superimposition and speed shapes and arpeggio stacking and all this kind of stuff. I think just to get people turned on to the sound of superimposition, if we have a minor 7 chord, could you talk about the 4 basic arpeggios that you might put on top of that, and then we'll get Brett to show us those 4 and how they sound.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's take the A minor 7. First off, there's 3 minor 7s, A minor 7. So we first have to decide.
So sorry, we'll go in E minor 7. E
minor 7. Okay.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
E minor 7. We have to decide what key it's in. Which form is it? You know, most of us that grew up listening to Santana are going to hear it as Dorian, as a 2 chord. It could be Phrygian if you like Al Di Meola. Maybe it's the 3 chord in the key of key of C, or it's a 6 in the key of G. So that's where people crash and burn often. Right at the beginning, they don't have a key center figured out. And if you don't have a key center, the substitutes aren't going to make any sense. So let's all agree that our E minor 7 is a Dorian 2 chord in the key of D. So a D major scale created the E minor 7. If the band is playing an E minor 7 groove and you tried to play up and down the key of D, you're going to sound like E minor 7. No matter how hard you try, the band's going to make you sound like E minor. That's the beauty of the, I guess, substitutes. So if we're on E minor 7, the E minor 7 arpeggio is the first starting place. And you have the scale. You might have the minor pentatonic to draw from, the blues scale, and you have this E minor 7 arpeggio. So arpeggio, scale, pentatonic. And you can have a lot of fun with those sounds. You can stir it up, go play up high, play down low, bend strings, just let yourself go nuts with it. But at some point you're going to go, kind of boring because I seem to be stuck in this one sound. What are some other arpeggios I could play? Well, if I borrow the substitution scenario, E minor 7 is the 2. I can go up to the 4 chord, the G major 7. That'd make a good. So let's listen to, and by the way, what I'm saying here is probably the best thing I'll say all day. Trial and error. I learned everything I know by trial and error. I didn't learn it by theory. I just tried stuff out, recorded it, and listened back and go, man, I sound good on that. I'm going to remember that. That's a good idea. Another thing, play it. That sucks. I can't. That doesn't work. I would try everything and chromatically to see what works and what didn't work. That's really the best way. But anyway, G major 7 arpeggio. We got some fingerings for that. What are the notes it gives you? Well, it's still an E minor sound, but it's got one magic tone in it. It's got an F sharp in it. It's got a ninth when you look at the perspective of E minor. Ninth. Oh, that's cool. That's why it sounds so interesting. G major 7 over the E minor sounds like an E minor 9. Okay, that's cool. That's then we go to what? What's be next? E minor up to what's next? Luke, I forget.
Are you going through the triad? So B or?
I'm in the key of D.
Yep. So you've got your E minor, you've got your G major 7. I think if we were building it off the chord tones, you might go B minor 7 next.
B minor 7? Yeah, that's the another arpeggio from the key of D. It's the 6. And it's got a tone. What would be the magic tone in there that's new? It's got a 6.
11th on top, right?
B tone, right? And so now it sounds, that arpeggio gives you another flavor. And then the final one would be the D major 7 off of the 7th degree. The D major 7 gives you sorry, my brain has still got chemo in it. Sorry. So those are the 4. The book doesn't start with the 4. The book really starts with two groups, the little baby combinations. To me, E minor 7, G major 7. Those two should be locked together at holy matrimony, because if you practice them together, you'll come up with all kinds of little melodies and ideas, and it's a good start. And if somebody asks you, do you know a minor 9 arpeggio? You go, no, but how about this? And you play an E minor 7 arpeggio and you play a G major 7 arpeggio mixed together in some kind of melodic fashion. You're good. You've passed the test. Nobody would deny you that you don't know a 9th chord arpeggio. So that's.
Brett, should we sound check on that, Brett?
Brett.
Oh.
He'll be able to kill it. He'll be great. Just if you got an E minor.
There we go. Yeah. So let me just get my little loop set up if you don't mind. Sorry, I hope this doesn't blow everyone's heads off. I have no idea how loud it's going to be. Okay, let me just get the loop sorted out here. My apologies.
So what we just did there was you went through the chord tones of E minor 7, and you built arpeggios off them, and every time you go up to the next chord tone, you get a different extension on top. You get an additional color tone.
Yeah, we went in thirds. So we started with E, then we went to G, and that's how it kind of works. It's really fun and basic.
Brett, you might be a little bit loud, someone said.
Sorry.
We'll get people saying turn it up, but well, there you go. That's nice.
So I'm just trying to get a.
It
might be a little bit. Loop might be a little bit shonky, but we'll persevere. This is our sound check anyway, so I'll just test the levels. You tell me what you think. So
one more guitar.
Is that okay?
I think even a little more
Great.
guitar from there would be good.
More guitar?
Yeah.
Not good, man.
One more time. So, yeah,
Yeah.
is that
That's it.
working? Is that okay?
I think so. I think we're good.
Yeah,
Right.
the loop's a little bit weird, but that's all right. You'll forgive me for that.
That's good.
So
So
what do we? What?
could you play us through going through E minor 7 and G major 7, just thinking in those two arpeggios for a little bit?
Okay. So there's E minor 7, right?
Yeah, man.
That's kind of how I piece those two things together, because that's exactly everything you're talking about there, Don, is the stuff that blew my mind when I finally became aware of it. Like, if people dive into this book and unlock this, if they've never done this before, it'll just transform everything about their playing. I'm convinced of
Yeah,
that.
you were killing it. It sounded good, and what the beauty of what you were doing is that you never left the key, so it was all E Dorian or G. I always have to put out two names. It's either E Dorian or D major, D
Right.
major scale. And you emphasize the two arpeggios, the E minor 7 arpeggio and the G major 7. Because we could hear that F sharp. It stood out, kind of, oh, cool, a ninth.
Yeah.
And you stayed within it. That perfect. I mean, that's all you want to be able to do. And with your, obviously, with your know-how, you can play that good in that simple of a demonstration. I'm scared to hear you when you actually get going. Man, that sounded great.
Yeah, I can't
Well, I mean,
imagine how.
no, I was just going to say, like I'm not a jazz musician at all, and that would be very apparent. But every time I've met jazz musicians, I try to learn from them and get as many ideas as I possibly can. And it's that way of thinking where, like you said, at the end of the day, you just play what sounds good. But if you can understand a deeper family that those notes come from, those sounds come from, then it just opens up another world of possibilities to you.
Yeah, I think the other cool thing is that you need to find the sounds. You need something to point you in the direction of the sounds, which is maybe where the book comes in. Sorry, someone just asked, what is the book? It's called Arpeggio Alchemy, and it's out on. If you go to guitarvivo.com, it'll be up there in the new release section. It's on Amazon as well. I'm interested about the people listening. Could you hear the subtle difference from when Brett went from E minor 7 and to the G major 7 and introduced that ninth? Once your ear's a little bit more accustomed to it, it really stands out as its own thing. But if you're a real kind of scale player that's always playing these sounds all the time, you might not be able to pick out on that subtlety. It's still something I'm learning. But yeah, you played it so well, Brett. You did amazingly. I can't imagine how hard that is to turn the brakes on like that when you can do all the stuff you can do.
Oh no, it's but look, the best way I should have probably done something like this, where I just played and then, because that's the note Don's talking about, is that two. Like, I hear that as the 9 or
Mhm.
the 2, and I just find that such a beautiful interval to hear over that kind. I mean, it's a minor 9 chord vamp anyway, so it draws you in that direction. But I understand exactly what you're saying, where like those particular intervals, if you look at them from the perspective of G major 7, but have that. I mean, someone could practice it like that, couldn't they? If they could just hit their low E
Yeah,
and
of
then
course.
play their just hear that G major arpeggio against that low E drone, and all of a sudden you realise all those beautiful notes belong in E, but you may not have discovered them before if you're a minor pentatonic player.
Well, he said something important that is kind of the fundamental thing about this is that you begin by knowing that all the arpeggios, the diatonic arpeggios, or chords for that matter, from the key of D are at play here. So you got E minor 7, you got F sharp minor 7, you got G major 7, you got A 7, right? B minor 7, C major 7.
C sharp, half diminished.
Yes. Sorry, minor 7 flat 5. And C sharp, right? Not C. What am I?
Yeah.
Key of E minor, not my friend. So all 7. You could sit here and demonstrate all day and just play off all 7 of them and have a great time, because they all contain the notes of the key of D. There's no surprises there. There's no new notes. There's no magic. But the 4 that we lifted out of those 7 are ones that tend to sound more like E minor. They're kind of pluralities of E minor. And the farther up we go, the farther away they get from. They start to add more extensions and less chord tones. That's the fun stuff about that. So E minor and G major 7, that is a combination that I would beg you to learn. It's a minor arpeggio to a major 7 arpeggio, and you'll see it in the book. You'll see this chapters and chapters about combinations, 2-note combinations and 4-note combinations. And I just, by writing the book, I learned so much about myself, playing arpeggio melodies when I had these groupings together, and I could look down at the fingerboard and I could see all 4 of them living there together, like the little lights come on. And I'd look at E minor and then I'd see, well, there's the 4 arpeggios. And hopefully I could do that in most of the positions on the fingerboard. And when you can do that, and you can also see the scale floating over the top, and you can also see the pentatonic floating over the top, the world is yours. I mean, you can start to create all kinds of sounds. But the truth of the matter is, there's nothing new going to happen. You're still going to be trapped in the key of D. You're still going to be playing those 7 notes. And that's not a bad thing, but that's how it works. Learn your diatonic harmony, learn the steps, 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5. The 5 chords are always dominant. 2, 3, and 6s are always minor 7. 7 chords always a minor 7 flat 5, and the 1 and 4 are the major 7s in any key. It doesn't matter. That's why we play such a wonderful instrument. We don't care what key we're in, well, except for E minor for me.
So maybe then to put a lid on that section, because we're getting to some more advanced or outside stuff. We'll skip to that kind of end one that we looked at earlier, which was the D major 7 over the E minor. Brett, I've messaged you in the chat. I sent you an audio track in the chat. I don't know if you can download that. It's what you're playing over, but it's a perfect loop. You might have to scroll up to see it. There's a little audio file. Don't worry if you can't find it, but maybe you could try that D major 7 over the backing track as well.
Well, I mean, like I said, I could just play the low drone, and then just that I love sort of practicing it like that, because I don't have the distraction of the backing track in a way, and you can really just hear those beautiful intervals and how they respond to the E minor drone. That's kind of what drew me into this style of playing, Don, was like hearing hearing all those intervals and understanding they came from another family, but at the end of the day, if you relate them back to E minor, then like you said, the world is yours. You've got it all. Like, I mean, like hearing that, because I'd hear all those as like that's the 6, the 4, and the 2, and the flat 7, and the 6 again. You know, that's that sort of thing. Like I'd relate them back to E minor, but understanding then they come from D major 7. Then you can start to use sort of shapes and things for licks that you might not have thought of before. Like if I had a favorite, like a favorite D major 7.
Nice.
Like a D major 7 lick that I had, now I can apply it to that E minor thing, and that's the basis of what you're talking about, I think.
Can I throw a little bit of a curve at you?
Please.
Let's just change the rules all of a sudden. Let's now think of E minor 7 not as a Dorian chord and 2-chord in the key of D. Let's think of it as a 3-chord in the key of C.
Okay.
Now it becomes a Phrygian, darker sound. So especially because you can play the pedal E, so this will tell the story right away. Play the low E and then play a C major 7 arpeggio over the top of it. Suddenly things change.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. So that's C. Was that C major 7 or C major 7? Right.
C major 7.
C major. I'm sorry. I think I was playing C7. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Okay, that worked too. Yeah. Now the 4-chord in a cool one that'll really get the sound here is F major 7. So pedal the low E and play it F major 7 arpeggio. There you go. Sometimes we traveled to a different part of the world.
It's beautiful when you're playing that F major 7 arpeggio, resolve it back to E to really get the color of it. I think I love that.
Try G7. G7. There you go. The beauty of that is that you didn't have to learn any new information. All you had to learn is a little bit about geometry of the fingerboard. And you go, well, I can play that same stuff. I'll just slide it up to here and play the same ideas and slide it up to here. So you can be a wizard at Phrygian, Dorian, and Aeolian or relative minor without skipping a beat, because you're going to play the same stuff. You know, that's how simple it is. And you don't need to make light of this kind of thing, because it's really stuff music's been built on for hundreds of years. So oh, hey Luke, sorry, back to you.
No, great. I'll just because I can already see people have bought the book. If you want to learn that stuff in the book, that's chapter 2, the diatonic triad superimposition, and we've also covered the chapter 13 a bit, chord tone arpeggio stacking, which is really cool. So those of you in YouTube asking about that. The question that we always get, no matter who I'm with, no matter what subject we were on before, the question I always get is, can you talk about outside stuff? How do I? Everyone wants to seem to be making themselves less listenable, which is great because I'm already there. So how do you start to use these concepts on maybe like altered dominant chords, or even on a minor chord? Can you use this to step outside over a minor backing?
Why not? Absolutely. The principles would be the same. But outside playing is a very tricky word because what's outside to him may not be outside to him, and not be. It's a relative term. It's like looking at a piece of art, and one person likes it, and one person doesn't. I learned that the hard way because I tried to learn to play outside, and I copied, Chick Corea and Joe Zawinul and Herbie Hancock and piano players, trying to figure out what the hell they were doing. Oh, it must be a scale. I got it. It's a scale up a half step. Then I'd realize, no, it's not that. It's something else. There's some hidden, until I just played on gigs and let myself have the freedom to just have a point A and a point B and just play kind of free through it. Now, it didn't hurt for me that I listened to the godfathers of guitar of outside. My favorite album to this day is the Tony Williams Lifetime Emergency album, which is John McLaughlin, Larry Young, and Tony Williams. And McLaughlin is in one of his early phases as he went through all these phases, but they're playing on tunes that don't really have key centers. They're just walking bass. There's sort of a sense of a home, but not necessarily. And I think Coltrane, a lot of these guys did the same thing. It's just, to me, it's the funnest way to play. I died of on gigs, I would tell our bass player, just start walking. 1, 2, and I don't care where, any key you want, but just start walking. And to play over the top of that is, to me, is one of the funnest things. Now, maybe it's because I'm lazy and I could just play and I didn't have to answer to any theory and rules. But I think some of the best stuff I ever came up with was based on that joy of just freedom, not being handcuffed to a key center and rules and regulations. It's hard to fathom. I know a lot of you guys listening to this going, what the hell is he talking about? But I think a lot of the free playing, the outside playing, is based on that. It's not based on rules. I mean, you can, I tried to teach it. I would say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We got 4 bars of A minor. We're going to play 4 bars of A minor, but during the 4th bar, we're going to pretend it's E7. So we got A minor, A minor, A minor, E7, the 5 chord of the A minor. That takes us back to the A minor. Okay, that makes sense. That sounds like something that the bebop guys would do, even though the tune might not do that. It might just be A minor for good. But they would hint at the 5 chord to set themselves back to 1 again. A minor, A minor, A minor, E7. But then you just start evolving that A minor, A minor, A minor, B flat 7, A minor, A minor, A minor. Maybe it's F minor, B flat 7 done quickly at 2/5. And then maybe you get bored with that. It's A minor, A minor, A minor, anything you want back to A minor. And that is fun. So I challenge you all to just try that. I know it goes against books like this. It goes against theory, but if people want to open that can of worms about playing outside, welcome to the world, because there's no rhyme or reason. And going up a half step, oh yeah, I got to do that. Oh, down a whole step, you can have an up a minor third. All those things are great, but best thing you can do is explore it yourself and just have fun with it. You'd be amazed at what you can come up with. And when you hear people do it, don't credit them so much. They just think they're just faking it here. I mean, Alan Holdsworth, he had a point A and a point B, and it was this far apart. And he would play the graphics of the guitar fingerboard, shapes, ideas, intervallic things. But he had such a good sense of resolving the idea. What he played in the middle almost didn't matter. it was, you listen to it and you go, well, that was really outside. What scale was that? Arpeggio was that? And he could never answer that. Nobody can answer that, because do it again. Can you play the exact same thing again? No, I can do something like it. And then you try, forget it. You crash and burn every time. It's a thing about playing music that I really enjoy, because it's true expression. I can go for it and just fall on my face. In fact, the harder I try, the worse I can get. I don't know, Luke, if I took it a little too far,
No,
but
that's great. I know you also gave a lot of examples in there about that A minor to how you kind of start to work backwards from the simple superimpositions, and you can take it any way you want in a logical
yeah,
way, but you can also take it any way you want in a very free way. And I think, Brett, you've probably done that as well, explored that kind of landscape of just finding your way through it. Is that kind of how you approach it as well?
Oh, yeah, completely. Yeah, and the crash and burn approach, definitely. Yeah, just uh, don't be afraid to try things and see if you can find a way to make them work. Because like I would have students, because I taught mainly rock players at GIT. That was who I worked with. No jazz musicians would darken my door because they knew there was nothing to learn there. But even some of the rock players, like, because they didn't come from a background of improvisation, when you try to get them to let loose and just be free and experiment, you could almost see terror in their eyes in a way, because they were like, "What do you mean I can do anything?" And I said, "Sure, let's just try some stuff. Try anything." And it was almost hard for them to take that step, which is exactly what you were talking about, like to just let go and see what happens between point A and point B, and who knows what you might discover in there. But yeah, it's almost like I'd hate someone to look at your book and think, this is the rule book, and this is the rule book, and this is how you play music, because you've just given people an amazing source of information, but what they do with it then is up to them, and that's where their personality has to come into that and bring life to it in a unique and individual way. That's what we're all trying to do, I think.
yeah.
Nice. I think we should probably backtrack a little bit. I don't know what we haven't had that many arpeggio questions, so I'm guessing everyone's cool with arpeggios. But what I would like to do is, maybe, Brett, could you share with us some of the shapes that you're actually using? Because the way you approach, you have a few different arpeggio shapes in your toolbox, and I think everyone loved your examples. Could you show us some of the positions you like to use for those like major shapes and those major seven things and the minor stuff?
Well, when Don mentioned Frank Gambale, Frank was the guy that kind of opened my eyes to this, because I'd always been doing this finger picking stuff, but I hadn't thought about utilizing that in the way that when I saw Frank's first video, and when you were talking about the small shapes, that's what really got me with what Frank was doing, because all the sweep picking I'd seen up to that point was the rock guys doing the really big 6-string stuff, but which Frank was more than capable of doing, but he was also doing the smaller groupings, and that's what suited me with my fingers. But it was just basic shapes like the. Like it was when I combined it with this movement this way, which Alan Holdsworth had the big impact on me with that. So I described it to Frank, where if I play a linear thing like that, that's Alan, and then the minute I go, that's Frank, and he just laughed and said, "Oh, it's the Frank and Alan show," and I said, "It really is." And but once I understood that, that's why. I can't wait to dive into your book, Dom, because once I saw your videos, that's when I realized it's where all this stuff comes from. It's like looking at this whole thing in that perspective, where you see everything superimposed on top of itself, and then it becomes that one thing. So, like you were saying, like if someone said, "Okay, we'll play E Dorian," like I see all those E minor 7 shapes. But But then when I connect them to say this, if I go like I see that as G major 7 as well. I see that in there. And then if I play when I hit the 6, I hear the A7 arpeggio in there. So and so I started to personally look at things like, well, my half steps are here. And that really opened up a door to me as well, because then it just gave me the flexibility to give me movement. Like I understand where you're coming from, where the notes are the notes, but it's how we sort of move around this real estate here that really defines us, defines what we're capable of, I think. And once I sort of cottoned on to what Frank was doing, I felt like it opened up the neck to me, so I could just had freedom to play and not really think so much about being locked down somewhere.
Nice. Oh, sorry, just quickly, Peter's said, unfortunately, your guitar volume is still a bit low. Could you turn it up a little bit more, please? Sorry, keep putting you on the spot there. So we'll start working through everyone's questions now. There are tons of questions. Also, there's tons of just praise for both of you and compliments for both of you. I will save these chats and I will send them to the guys and make them read them, everyone. So if I don't read out your message to Don or Brett, I'll make a record of it and I will send it to them, so they will see all the stuff you're saying for them. This one is from the YouTube land. We'll start working our way up there. Someone's asked, do you have an arpeggio approach to the half whole diminished scale, Don?
Yeah, diminished arpeggios and major triads. Major triads are my favorite diminished sound, and it just turns out it's cool if you pick up on this, you guys, right now. Good. Major triads, a minor third apart, G, B flat, C sharp. Those, if you combine the notes of the 4 triads, a minor third apart, you get all the notes of a diminished scale. But the sounds that you can create, instead of just running up and down a scale, if you start combining the little arpeggio shapes, little triads, you got to, suppose you're at the, you're playing over G7, you're the 3rd fret. You got a G triad right there, and you got a B flat, and you got the C sharp. And if you have those patterns figured out, even the little 3-note shapes, and you start stabbing around at them, in one day, I promise you, you'll go, man, I'm getting this diminished thing down. This is cool, because it will sound diminished all the way because you're nailing all the notes, but it's being done with little happy triads. And so the little friendly major triad suddenly turns evil and can create this dark, diminished sound that's wonderful. And some guy wrote a book about symmetric scales, and I think he put a whole bunch of licks in there about this.
I hate that guy. I hate that guy. So the reason we don't have a diminished book yet is because someone wrote a book on it 25 years ago, and our philosophy is we only do it if we can do it better, and that's why we haven't got a diminished book yet. So that is symmetrical scales as well, because you talk about whole tone stuff in there too, right?
Yeah, augmented triads. Yeah, every major third. Actually, you can go major augmented triad going up in whole steps, and you create the whole tone scale. You'll get all the same notes, but the way you're getting the notes is through arpeggios, your new best friend, rather than a scale. And I was encouraged to do both. Practice the scale, but having those little augmented triads live in there all over the place. If you're playing on G7 sharp 5 and you want to get that altered whole tone sound, you'll be playing the G Augmented and the B major third and the whatever's next. And the sounds are it's the same principle as the diminished using the major triads, the same thing. But you got to commit to a neighborhood. Don't try to do 5 patterns. We lived in a world with Howard Roberts at GIT was learning everything in 5 positions. I got over that. 1 position. If you can make music out of it, just do it there. Just have fun with 1 position. Get it comfortable. Make some music out of it. Nobody in the club's going to catch you moving your hand 5 frets because you don't know it somewhere. You'll work on that later. But if you can get a neighborhood down, I that's why I chose G7 because at the 3rd fret, because that's the neighborhood I got down. And when I think of G7 at the 3rd fret, I got an army of stuff going on there. I got the major triads, every minor third. I got the augmented triads. There's a number of things, and you can extend those out. You can play a dominant instead of just a major triad. You can play a dominant 7th triad. Well, not triad, a 7th chord, and you can play G7, B flat 7, C sharp 7, F7. Now you've introduced some notes that are not necessarily in the diminished scale, but man, is it going to sound good because you're following this sequence of minor thirds, and so it's going to have the personality of a diminished, but you can have these extra notes. Call it outside if you want. That'd be one way to play outside. All right.
I hear it quite a lot with this, specifically with this kind of superimposition stuff or with sidestepping stuff, about the power of the major triad for creating these symmetrical moves or creating some outside things because of, from what I hear, because of the kind of how ingrained it is in us and how much of a logical and pleasing structure it is that you can do this thing where you move it in minor thirds and go diminished with it, but there's still this strength and logic to it because you're using the major triad. Is that, would you have an opinion on that? Is that kind of what you just said?
Well, I do remember the person that fascinated my playing with Robin. And Robin, he didn't play like 7th chord arpeggios. He was a triad guy. Yet this very technique of playing triads, major triads up in minor thirds, he's got some classic Robin Ford riffs that are based on that, because I think spending some time around Miles Davis probably woke him up to that sound, and and thus I jumped all over it too when I saw him play the thing. But the possibilities are endless, and you can just come up with a million. And by the way, since you can come up with a million ideas, doesn't mean you should. Don't write a book like this. Don't do that to yourself. Learn a couple things and have fun with them. Just get it down. Don't try to tackle too much. We're all guilty of that. I got it in 1 position. I'm going to work on the 2nd position tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to. And then you get to Sunday and you can't remember any of it, and you're pissed off and you burn your guitar. And so it's finding little gems, becoming comfortable with them, and enjoying them for what they are. You'll have others; they'll grow. You'll if you have one idea and it's blossoming, it's bound to spill out up at 5 frets higher, 6 frets higher. And you go, oh my God, I can do this here. And then Howard Roberts, Luke, you won't like this, but Howard Roberts, his words of wisdom always was about guitar books. He didn't like them, even though he wrote guitar. Well, he didn't write guitar books. He had people. Don't give people guitar books. Teach people to write guitar books. That's the secret. And I've always had that voice of Howard with about 4 Coors beers, Howard, saying that to me. And he's really right. You know, we have to all become the teachers at some point. Where you got to quit being students and you know, teach yourself to play. Write it down. Write a book.
Send it to me. I'll publish it. No, I'm joking. I won't. Um, the Yeah, you're really right there. There's kind of a crisis on my conscience when we put out a book like this, which is just full of page after page of concept, of idea, of practical thing, where you're writing it and you go, I really hope someone doesn't buy this to work through it. I hope they buy it to just find one nugget and live in that little world, to just explore what's happening at the bottom of page 65 for a year. And you know that's not going to happen because that's wishful thinking. But even in this call, there's so many things that have been said that even if you just act on one of those things and dig a mile deep on it, you'll revolutionize your playing. I don't say that lightly. I mean, guitar education. I don't hand that around as just like willy nilly. That's a big thing to say. And that if you, whether or not you buy this book or whether you think that Don's just giving you so much stuff in this call, or Brett's done so many shapes, or whatever. It's all about taking little nuggets and mining them, which is kind of the philosophy of the book, about taking the simple stuff and seeing how far you can take it. Right, I'm going to keep going with some questions. Do you mind if I take one, because it's going to test and then you can tell me if I got it right, because it's going to test how much I remember from when I proofread the book. So someone has asked about superimposing to create altered sounds. Now, I'll nerd out on what I remember from the book. There's the altered scale, and there are also other ways that you can get alterations using the melodic minor and the harmonic minor scale. So in the book, you talk about how with superimposition, you can take all of the arpeggios from a scale or a key and use them to create a sound. Now, when you're creating an altered sound, in the book you talk about how you can use the melodic minor up a half step. So you can go to that key and use all of the arpeggios from that key. You can use the melodic minor down a whole step and use all the arpeggios from that key. You can do it, up a fifth and up a fourth as well. So I'll summarize that again because I was remembering it as I was talking about it. To Don's method for superimposing, and call me out if I've got this wrong, some altered sounds, or at least some of those methods, is to look at the 4 different melodic minor placements that give you different altered sounds and using the harmony from those. Have I kind of got that right? Have I confused even you? Have I made it that bad?
No, you're refreshing my memory. It's great.
Yeah, so that's the reason I took that, is because that leads me on to the point that is a mind-blowing thing that I got from you in this book, and I get from John Stoll. This little nugget that you can use scales over chords in this altered setting, even if they don't contain all the notes of the dominant or altered chord. So I'll explain that, right? If you're like me, you look at scales and you go, oh, what chord's in there? But if the chord's not in the scale, it doesn't fit. But what you do is, like on that altered thing where you play melodic minor down a whole step, you're actually missing some notes from the altered chord. You're missing the third, but you get the flat 9, the sharp 9. So that's kind of a mind-blowing thing of, oh, it's not just like a one-to-one, is the chord in the scale. It's, are the sounds of the scale acceptable over the chord, whether it's there or not, right?
That's really important what you just said. It's knowing the chordal sound that you create. By going up a half step and playing a melodic minor, you get the potpourri of altered sounds. You get all 4 alterations: flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5. I think, right? But going up a fourth or up a fifth or down the whole step, the emphasis is on different tones. And so I would always recommend that you do them by chords. Play 2-5-1s with chords first. Learn that and alter the chord, and then match the scale to capture that chord sound. because that's all altered playing was ever for me. And I thought that's what I was hearing listening to Joe Pass was Joe was when he would improvise single notes, I could still hear the chords. Why? Because he just mimicked his own harmonic know-how, and it just stood out. He didn't need an accompanist because the lines reflected the chords so well. Yeah, that's all. And speaking of that, how this pertains to the arpeggio book, uh, there's really only a couple new arpeggios that are introduced when we start talking about harmonic and melodic minor. Harmonic minor has a three chord, which is a major seven with a sharp five. Well, that's an oddity. That's not one of the diatonic happy chords that we learn with diatonic harmony. But it's its own unique. So you put that on the shelf. Go, okay, major seven, sharp five. I'm going to learn a couple fingers of that. Fine, and then you have the the seven chord. What's left? No, that's it. That's it for the melodic minor. And the harmonic minor, you also have that for the three chord, a major seven with a sharp five. But you also have this is where the actual diminished seventh chord lives, off the seventh degree of a harmonic minor. So in A harmonic minor, it's in C, it's an F, G sharp, uh, diminished seventh chord, and his three chord would be the C major seven sharp five. Uh, so those are thrown in the book, and I think I have a disclaimer saying, look, if you're not playing this kind of music and you don't worry about it. It's fun to fantasize about it and know the theory, and I ask you to learn the theory. But if you're not playing these kind of tunes that have you know chord changes that require that level of sophistication, toss it in the garbage can. Don't worry about it, right?
Yeah, the book like opens up with the 11 core arpeggios, but even in that you go, the final four are kind of optional. Like,
Yeah, there you
right. So I'm going to keep working through these questions. Brian Uric has says, Don, do you ever use scales like harmonic major and or melodic minor sharp five?
go. I tried. I taught the fusion class at MI, and we had a whole section on exotic scales. And I did my homework and traveled the world looking for every kind of weird scale I could find. And what turned out to be the case, like I think I'm not correct here, but I'll just as an example, there was some Japanese scale. There's a five note scale, sounded very exotic when you started on the root. But then I started on the fifth or the fourth, and I went, this is a pentatonic scale. That's all it is. And as I started to kind of do my homework on these scales, it turned out that so many of them were modal, were harmonic minor, melodic minor, or flat out major scales. And they were seven note versions, six note versions, and five note versions. And that could create a lot of scales. Now, when harmonic major, no, I tried to I tried to make sense of that, and I didn't have much luck because I'm so ingrained in my good friends harmonic and melodic minors that I feel like I can get all the sounds I need with those. And we all have to just draw a line and say, I can't deal with it. I have a friend that takes lessons from a really good flamenco guitar player here in Seattle, and the teacher Eric came over one time, and I've had a fascination about a scale that I hear in flamenco playing, and the note would be, they'd play something like A minor, G, F to E, E7, and they have progression like that, kind of like an Al Di Meola, Paco kind of movement. A minor, G, F, and when you get to the F chord, they would play it as a seventh chord, F7, and they'd have this weird note, an E flat in there, and then they get to E7, and what do? They play it again. And so they're playing the five chord, which in jazz is you can't do that. You can't play a major seventh tone. In flamenco, it's the holy grail of passing tones, and so I guess you would say it's a 8-note dominant scale, but I had a fun time trying to figure it out with him. I'm not sure I learned it, but I sure love hearing it. That love the sound. There you go, Luke.
Thank you. Yeah. We'll keep rolling through these. So Tim Lurch has said, Don, I think the teacher in Seattle you mentioned earlier was Al Ture. Was that the guy?
Tim, you weren't supposed to say that out loud.
Oh.
I didn't want
to.
to.
I'm an accomplice now. Great.
It was. It was.
The incredible Isaac de Green has asked a question. Don, your earlier books were an inspiration to many guitarists, including myself, of course. During a phase of my studies, they were a revolutionary tool for developing melodic vocabulary. Today, with students who are at an advanced technical level but often lack musicality, what do you notice that students are overlooking in order to become more musical and less focused on empty technique thrown to the wind?
Blues. That I've always said that it's the missing link that I've had students all over the world, and especially students from Europe and Italy, and and they're really hung up on. They would come and see me or Joe Diorio in our little office there, and they wanted the intervallic cool stuff and all the really complicated, because they thought that was important to add to their style. But when they would play, there was something missing. Phrasing. There was just something I couldn't put a finger on. And I wish I'd put my finger on it really hard on some of those guys' noses. I said, stop with the intervallic stuff for a week. Here's a BB King album. Immerse yourself in it. Learn. Blues teaches so much, and blues phrasing, and yeah, you can play nuts. I mean, there's techniques. I'm a marvel. I go on YouTube and I see these guys. The guy that plays with his fingers, what's his name? Man, he's eliminated the guitar pick. Somebody name him. What's his name?
Matteo
Mateus
Mancuso.
Mancuso.
That's him. Some of the greatest stuff I've ever heard in my life, and he's doing it without a guitar pick. And I'm sure that all of the great pickers like Pat Martino would just go, why did I bother? It turns out Segovia was right. John Williams, playing the guitar with the right hand fingers, you got 4 picks instead of 1. It's astonishing, that. Anyway, but I would say listening to blues is the missing link, I think. But I'm not as plugged in as I was, so I could probably, if I put my mind to it, criticize. But it's hard to criticize some of these.
Well, actually,
we're all on a.
I'd be
Sorry?
interested to throw that over to Brett and Tim Lurch. I have a feeling that you guys would probably agree. Or do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, I mean, for me personally, like getting older as a guitar player is there's an interesting sort of shape to how you'd approach it for me anyway, because a lot of times, say if I put on this E minor groove, if I play to that in the morning, it's actually a test to see if these still work. It's like, it's just, do they still function? Do they still move? And it's not terribly musical. It's more like just trying to get some oil in the joints to sort of see if stuff still functions. But then if someone says, play we're going to play to this, play a solo, it will be blues based. It'll always go back to that. Look, I'm not an experienced blues player. Like I come from more the white British pasteurized version of the blues rather than the real roots of it. But ultimately, yeah, it does come back to that and just phrasing and trying to be musical, and all the other stuff in between is just there for some interesting colours and a bit of personality. But no, I hear exactly what you're saying, Don. Look, I'd love to hear what Tim has to say. I'm going to shut up now. So
I think that Don's right on with the blues, and I would even go so far as to say start with Louis Armstrong if you want to understand the blues don't start with Stevie Ray Vaughan, because Stevie Ray Vaughan is wonderful, but there's a whole legacy of blues in all different styles. So I don't think there's a jazz musician from Louis Armstrong forward all the way to John Scofield or Don Mock or anybody who doesn't have a blues inflection in their playing. And when that's missing, it seems like it's missing. And then the other thing that I would say is we have at our disposal a complete and genius library of beautifully written songs. And oftentimes we forget that those beautifully written songs have genius melodies. So one thing I always tell students when they ask me, how do you play so melodically? I say, I learned songs. Because I'm never going to be able to invent a more beautiful melody than Cole Porter. Cole Porter wrote beautiful melodies, and they're all there for the picking, you know. You can just reach up this low-hanging fruit. And it tells you about what notes to play over what chords. It tells you how long to play your phrases so that they make sense. It tells you everything. So we've got something that teaches us how to play melodically. And then if we add, you know, the kind of concepts that Don and Brett are talking about, superimposition and the more complicated stuff, if we have the basis, then that stuff starts to make more sense as a cohesive musical thought. So that's my idea.
Boy, you can't second that any more than what he just said.
No.
And I wish I'd followed that myself. Wish I'd learned. I just wasn't a jazz guy when I was younger. And I didn't learn jazz standards like Tim has done. Tim, you could rattle off anything to him. And just speaking of what I know about Tim and what I've seen him play online, it has really enhanced his guitar playing. He's just gotten more adult and grown up and laid back and melodic and everything you die for as a guitar player, you know. And so I second everything you said. I wish I'd learned. I wish I'd had your background though on those tunes, because I don't think I know a Cole Porter tune, do I?
Thank you guys. Great. Just this isn't a question, but it's worth saying. Brett is so humble; he could school most players out there. I just feel like wanted to remind you, Brett, that you're you don't need to play yourself down. I think everyone knows you're the real deal. This question is from Guitar Breakdown. Could you please talk a little bit about your Ballad of Triangles in the GIT Book 10 and any Eddie Van Halen stories based on his offering in that book?
Eddie, I got to know him a little bit. I took all the pictures of him in Pat Hicks's office for the 10 book. We went in there and I said, just put your fingers on them like you're playing something. And then I went to his house, saw the car collection, talked to him on the phone a few times. But that was my rubbing elbows with the stars. What was the other side of that? The important part of that question?
Yeah. Can you please talk a little bit about your Ballad of Triangles?
Oh yeah, right. Okay, well, that's pretty simple. My chapter was written about what I was calling at the time triads over bass notes. Now I probably would say slash chords. Slash chords are a fragment, a chord of some sort with a slash at a 45-degree angle and a single bass note, as opposed to a polychord, which would have a horizontal line and might be F over C, and they both be chords. But I was in the midst of my fusion class and had this idea that that we learned all of those major triads over bass notes. I didn't have a lot of patience for the minor triads over bass notes. They're nice, but the major ones sounded like I was hearing them every day, especially in LA. You'd hear Larry Carlton and Steely Dan and the kind of music. And it seemed like those sounds, you know, G over G triad over A, you know, creating basic chord sounds, but doing it with a simple triad and a bass note. So I wrote my chapter on that. That's all there is. And so I discussed every chord, every possible of the 12. Tried to write a thing about each one. But then I thought, I need a prize at the end of this chapter. I got to come up with something here. And so I said, I'll write a little solo guitar piece. And the rule is I have to use all 12 of these chords. And I had a fun time. I remember living in LA at the time, trying to come up with a song that used, A over A flat or A flat over A, those kind of sounds. And so Ballad of Triangles started to unfold. It actually got kind of cool as a tune. And I ended up recording it on an album. But it's nothing more than a demonstration of simple major triads with all 12 of the possible: A over A, B flat over A, B over A, C over A, C sharp over A, D over A, all of those different chord sounds. And some of them are just basic everyday chords. They're wonderful. But some of them are altered sounding. And to try to get them into a little solo guitar piece was a challenge. But I did it. I came out with something. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off that, if you can't get a hold of the book 10, Dean Brown did a book with us called Upper Structures, which is a very similar thing. And I will say your book inspired me, helped me on that, because unfortunately we didn't have access to Dean. It was to help his estate, basically. And to help me understand the concepts, I went and read your chapter in 10, and it helped me understand what Dean was talking about.
Okay.
So if you can't get hold of 10, which is rare, but I can see some people sharing pictures of it, check out Upper Structures by Dean Brown. More questions, some great questions. A question on vocabulary, and this is for both of you, Brett as well. So the question is, how many licks can a guitarist memorize? But I suppose the real question is, if you guys were put on the spot, how many licks would you say that you have or you can recall? And do you have a process on memorizing licks, or do you see an importance to licks and vocabulary? What's your opinion on the whole licks gambit?
Go, Brett. I'm still processing.
Oh, well, I was I guess licks was all I had for a long time. And when I first moved to Los Angeles, I did an album called Centrifugal Funk, which had Frank Gambale and Sean Lane on it, and I just played over some of the simpler songs, and I think luckily back then I had just a huge array of licks that I could play in almost any key, and I think I used all of them on that album. Under the instruction of the producer, who told me I had to play more notes. So, because I'd come from a pop rock background where in studios where people were telling you to halve it, play a third of the notes, and then I end up on this session where he says, "No, we're going to need way more than that." So I think every lick I'd learned since I was about 12 came out on that album. But through the course of working at GIT and just talking to some of the greatest musicians I'd ever get to meet, I realized that I had to try a different approach, and that's where I started to try and look at individual notes and intervals and try and lessen the licks. So now I find it really hard to insert licks into my playing, and unless they're sort of more arpeggio-based licks like we've been talking about. But I try to blend them into where they're embedded in lines where they're hopefully disguised a lot more. So I think it's more important. It's been more important to me to recognize the sound of intervals and develop my relative pitch rather than memorizing licks, because that's where these nuggets are that Don's been talking about, where you can hear that over a minor chord. If you hear a major 6, you can go, oh, it's a Dorian sound. Or if you hear a minor 6, you can interpret that as an Aeolian sound. Or a flat two can become a Phrygian or an altered sound, or all these sorts of exciting things. I found that really exciting when I could just think of individual notes and apply them to whatever the chord was in the background. And all, once I learned possibilities that were attached to those intervals, I had a lot of choices. And then the funny thing is, at the end of the day, yeah, you probably will just play the blues over it. And I've heard some of the greatest soloists, from Michael Brecker to Don to Scott Henderson, and they have all this knowledge and all this stuff at their fingertips, but the blues is the default go-to, because it really is the shortest distance between 2 points, I think. But anyway, that's enough from me.
I think that was great. It's a big subject for me. We've had books full of riffs and licks and demonstrations, and of course, but the words of wisdom that I would offer is that at some point we all have to learn music. It's not inherently in our brains, you know. To learn like jazz melodies, you're not going to learn scales and arpeggios and suddenly go on stage and suddenly blurb out John Coltrane. At some point you need to learn music, and the more melodies that you can learn and become part of your psyche, the better. So, and there's a time and a place for that. So, a quick Scott Henderson story. Scott is the last person you would think who had learned licks. I mean, he's shaking his head at students and slapping them around for trying to learn the latest lick. No, just play something that you've never played before. That's hard to do, actually. Well, Scott, remember the time you were in your bedroom and you were practicing, and I was listening to you, and I heard some really familiar stuff. And he came out with this sheet of paper, and I had done the exact same thing a few years earlier. He had a sheet of licks, but not written out. He just had a description. John Scofield, bar 4, name a tune. Joe DiOrio, A7 flat 9 riff. Ronnie Este, chord move for this and that. And he had this huge list, and he was embarrassed to show it to me. And I looked at it and I went, man, Scott, I did the exact same thing. Well, it was a period of time for him. It was a learning. He was packing his head full of music. And so don't ever feel bad about learning licks, but make that not your whole life. Licks go hand. If you think of, I don't even like the term licks. To me, it's learning music, learn melodies. Now, some of the crazy stuff we were into, intervallic, fast, you wouldn't say that's melodic, and you wouldn't go around the house singing it to yourself. It's a more mechanical. And when you play it, I would hear myself on tapes. I sounded mechanical. I hated it. I hated listening to myself reciting these complicated geometric, athletic things on the guitar. I regret that I didn't pair it up with more melodies, but I didn't know how to do that. All I knew how to do was play licks fast, sequences fast, and arpeggios real fast. And so I hope other people have learned from that. I've tried to spread that to my students. But licks are good, no doubt about it. I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for clear back to learning Eric Clapton and Mike Bloomfield and even Jimi Hendrix. I copied every little phrase I could. And the thing is you can't play it like the person did. You're going to play it like you play it. So licks are okay because they're going to, people say, oh, I don't want to learn licks. I want to sound like myself. Well, they hear me play and they go, wow, I never heard anybody sound like you. You sound really unique. And I said, no, you just heard my whole vocabulary of George Benson and Pat Martino and John McLaughlin and blah, blah, blah. But it's me trying to do it. It's my interpretation of it. And I was thrilled that I sounded original to people, but that was never the intent. I wanted to sound like George Benson and John McLaughlin. Looks okay. But pair it up with theory and music, I guess is. I think Tim nailed it by learning melodies of tunes. That's a shortcoming for me, because if you can go around the house singing melodies, you could sing this whistle while you're taking a shower of Donna Lee, and you understand every tone, why they exist. God, that you're it's a great lick. The whole tune's a great lick, but man, there's a big lesson there.
And there's the other side to licks, which I don't. Well, yeah, you must have worked with Carl Verheyen, which he's kind of into that idea of writing your own licks and then cataloging all that kind of stuff. I I think Brett, maybe you were this way in the start, so I'd love to also know your opinion on this. Was a part of finding your own sound just sitting down with like a blank slate and going, I'm going to come up with my own vocabulary, and just seeing what comes out, and then kind of cataloging that and refining it? Is that part of the process for you guys?
Well, but for me, yeah, because I spent all day trying to learn a Larry Carlton song because I loved Larry. He was a real turning point for me. It was off the Sleepwalk album. I can't remember what it was, like the last song or the. It was sort of. I think now when I listen to it, it was sort of based around an altered scale. The song, and it was really cool, and I loved the notes, but I didn't know what that scale was back then. I didn't know why they sounded great. I just knew I liked it, and I spent all day trying to learn it. And by the end of the day, I could play it very badly, but I did figure out the notes, and I'd ruined my LP from putting the needle back and forth so many times, and I had a headache. And I realised, like, I don't know any more than I did at the start of the day. I just can play a terrible version of Larry's song. And that's when I thought that energy would have been better spent just working on my own thing and trying to come up with something unique. So I developed a different philosophy where I'd try and come up with at least one lick a week that I could apply when our band played on the weekend. And I thought, okay, so I'll try and learn a lick through the week that I can insert into one of our songs in an improvised solo. And it was interesting when I did it that way because, it depended on what the lick was as to whether I could use it in every key, where it was on the neck. If it was a thing that involved a big stretch, I don't have very big hands and I don't have a big access on the instrument. So maybe I had to play it up higher, or could I use it down lower, or was it the sort of thing I could insert into a line rather than be a lick? And the funny thing is, a lot of that stuff ended up on that Centrifugal Funk album, and I thought it was nice to see it actually got used. But the only thing that saved me on that record, that album, was because I certainly wasn't anything compared to Frank or Sean in terms of musical knowledge or technique. The only thing that saved me was that whenever I used those licks, they were somewhat unique because I haven't heard anyone else play them, and it's probably because I wasn't learning them off anybody else. I was just trying to come up with my own stuff. So I don't know, if you're going to spend a lot of time learning licks, try to invent your own rather than learn somebody else's. So that's my 2 cents.
And were you the same way, Don? Because it surprised me because I had to count up every exercise in this book, and there was like 240 things, and there's so many just licks or not licks, but musical ideas that you wrote that aren't coming from anywhere, except for maybe the Larry Coryell chapter.
Yeah, well, you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, I'm probably the guiltiest of years and years of writing books and trying to demonstrate an example. Well, best way to do it is to write a musical example. Maybe it's 16 notes long or 32, and it looks odd, it smells like it looks an awful lot like a lick. And sometimes that's just what it had to be. You want to demonstrate a particular maneuver or a harmonic sound. The best way to do it is write an example. So, my books are full of what people might say are licks. I got to the point, to me it's recently, but it's probably been 15 years ago, I decided I did a book on modes and a book on dominant seventh chord. The dominant seventh chord, good book. You can find
It's,
that at your
it's
local.
just been re-released. Mastering the Dominant Chords.
Yeah,
GuitarVivo.com.
Well, instead of demonstrating licks after licks, I decided to try to write little solos, little etudes. Well, they still sound like licks, but at least they're different, you know. But yeah, I saw myself as a composer of guitar lines. You know, that's kind of was my moniker, I think, there for a while. Because I could just crank them out. I would get an idea. I'd see Joe play something or somebody around the school, and I go, oh, that was cool. The flat five interval thing he just did. I can build a whole riff around that, and I can harmonize it so I can play it over major chords, over minor chords. You know, that's kind of how my brain worked. I'm not sure it was the best thing, but we all take our paths. But I will stand behind my one thing is when people say to me, students say, I don't want to learn licks. I don't want to sound like anybody else. I just want to play what I hear. And I ask them, well, what do you hear? Sing me something, you know. What do you really hear? Well, the truth of the matter is they don't hear shit. They're not hearing what they think they are. What people do hear is rhythmical phrasing. You can ask them to sing a jazz solo, and they might go, yeah, that sounds like a jazz solo, because the phrasing was sort of something they emulated. But what are the actual notes? Nah, not there. So playing what you hear, you got to put it in there to hear it. Playing what you know is what it really should be said. Playing what you know and loading your head full of as many ideas you can have, and then let them come out in a creative way. And don't play it the same way twice. Get so comfortable you don't have to think about it. And we've all had those wonderful experiences where you're a witness to your playing. You just stand back and watch yourself play because you don't know how it's all happening. Then there's other nights where it's the opposite and it's miserable. But so back to the licks. Yeah, licks are good to a point. Couple it up with some nice music theory know-how, and you'll be good to go.
I struggle to interpret your tone on like your feelings towards that. So the idea of if you want to learn something theoretical or an idea or a concept or some superimposition, say from the book, do you recommend that people like write an etude or write a lick to internalize it, or do you prefer they don't and they just try and get a feel for it?
Say that again.
So,
That
so you were
they
talking about
analyze it.
you were talking about how you used to write licks and how
Yes.
you saw. Do you recommend that people, if they're trying to learn a new theory or a new concept, that they go and write an etude with it, or they go and write some licks with it?
Yeah, I would. I sure did. I'm not saying that what I did. Everybody's on a different path. So what I did's got a lot of holes in it. I look back and wish I'd done things a little differently sometimes. I wish I'd listened to different people. I was a guitar player, because I had this mentality that if they could play it, I could play it. But when you put on Chick Corea, if he can play it, I don't know if I could play that because I can't see it on my instrument. But you could throw any guitar player at me when I was in my 20s and 30s, and it didn't matter. I'd figure it out. Because it was inherent in my DNA that if they could do it, I could. But that ended up being a guy that played guitar riffs all the time. You know, guitar players. And I wish that I'd gone back and forced myself on those horn players and the piano players more. But that's okay. You know, it's
Nice. I've got some arpeggio questions. We'll do the last couple of questions and then we'll let everyone go. Um, so someone has asked on YouTube, do you have any advice for making arpeggios sound less predictable, less like sequences, Is that where you start to add in chromatics or scale tones? How do you, yeah, stop them sounding like an exercise?
Yeah, that's a he kind of answered his own question there, but one of to me, what we do in the book where we have little fragments of small arpeggios, and we have multiple ones. We for C major seven, we have 4 or 5 arpeggios that all nestle together, and they're all still within the key, but you can also borrow from other keys. You can say C major seven's Lydian chord, or you can decide it anything you want. But for me, it's driving around within those simple arpeggios when I could go from one to another and back, and then yeah, maybe a chromatic idea is a good idea. Maybe I'll run down 4 chromatic tones, and that's where you can get pretty creative. Of course, I would stop myself and go, "Oh, I just played something pretty cool. I better write that down, or make some kind of note of it so I remember it." Um, but it's just doing. I hope that arpeggios is a pretty boring subject. I mean, it's just they're everywhere. Arpeggios are music. You can't play 3 or 4 notes in music and not have call it an arpeggio. Everything it's arpeggios. So it's the whole thing's kind of a moot point, one way, but but they sure can be little little drivers to being creative and getting out of the slump that I was in, running up and down arpeggios real fast, and not, it'd be obvious. I'd play it. Here'd be a George Benson lick. Oh, now we Pat Martino. Here's a Joe DiOrio riff. Here's an arpeggio. And then continuing on, it was obvious. You could listen to my playing and you could just see the thought process. And I and I go, well, the arpeggio, the other stuff sounded good, but the arpeggio sucked. Why? Because you didn't play anything with it. You just started at the bottom, ran up the top, and went back down to the bottom again. Point of that. So that it got us on the path of trying to find ways to mixing arpeggio, mixing these different sounds. That's why I hope, if anything in the book, the little combinations will be one thing that you really enjoy. And there's some licks, there are examples and things, but the concept is I find it fascinating. I just can't get enough of the knowing that I'm on a G7 chord and I go G7, B minor 7, flat 5, D minor 7, F major 7. I have those 4 arpeggios and I know them really well right in that neighborhood. I can go down one, I can and I can sound like a 13th chord, I can sound like a 11th chord, I can sound like a 9th chord, and I can throw in a blues riff. I can play something chromatic. I can play a lick that I learned off somebody's record. Then I can go back to my arpeggio friends again and stir up trouble. It's a fun tool, but there's still just arpeggios.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really interesting thing. So you just mentioned there, this is the final question. You just mentioned there all these arpeggios over this chord. Someone's asked, how practical are these things in real time? Or like, and they specifically said, are symmetrical arpeggios like available and practical in real time? Do you have a response to that?
In real time, well, that's if you're well prepared and you have the confidence to just explore live. That's why practicing is so important. To, it, I think so. I think that's a wonderful way to play music. To just you don't have to go in with a plan. You don't have to go in with set licks they've been practicing over and over again. You have them at your disposal, but you have a concept rather than a mechanical machine at your disposal. And the arpeggio, the little baby arpeggios, is a concept. There isn't a right and wrong way. You may discover you like a combination that I didn't make a big deal about, but that's what sets us apart. So. I don't know if that answered it there, Luke, but
I did it. We do have some questions on your Round Midnight arrangement. I think um, we should do another session and talk about your Jimmy Weibel stuff and your Round Midnight stuff. That was a very popular, well, that is a very popular YouTube video, and I think it's how most people might have seen you. That and the Blues from Rock to Jazz video.
mhm.
Maybe we can find time another day to explore those things. I think that's going to bring us to a close here. I'll thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you all so much. Thank you to Don and Brett for sharing your wisdom. I will, everyone, all these messages of thanks and all of these ex-students of Don's, I will copy these messages and I'll put them in an email to Don. And all the ones from Brett, I'll put them in an email to Brett as well. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I will talk a little bit about this for a second. Don, could you sum this up and could you give a soundbite on what's in this book? This lovely, this is our most artistic cover as well. It's our first ever illustrated cover. It's a lot of firsts.
A soundbite?
Yeah, if you could sum up these 160 something pages in a little.
Oh, I see. It is that's my nature, is I find a simple subject, a simple topic, and then go crazy with it. I enjoy that aspect of discovering. I think it's important people know that book writing, first off, I couldn't play everything in that book. It's a process. I sit with my computer and my guitar, and I figure out something. Oh, this will make a great example, and then I'll write it on my notation, and I'll hit play on my keyboard, and I'll listen to it played back with like a trumpet sound or a piano sound. Go, oh, I should change that note to C sharp, and then 6 months later, I go to record it, and I don't recognize that. What the hell was I thinking there with that riff? That's sometimes the process of books. Don't think that the artists can absolutely rip off and play everything in the books. I got called on that more than one time when people pulled out a book in a class. Can you play example 17? I go, I don't know. Can I look at it? No, I can't. I have to practice it. And that's just being honest. Um, but the book, the core subject that this book was born from was the ideas of short one octave arpeggios and the combinations of grouping those together over given chords. And that's really the two things, I enjoy. I threw a little oddball chapter in there, if you don't mind, Luke, the thing about Larry Coryell, because it's a lick, and it's an arpeggio lick, but the real lesson there is how a guy like me can learn this lick back in the early 70s and turn it into a major component of my playing. How that little lick that I learned off Larry's album, which is an arpeggio riff, how I took that and kept playing it and playing it, and I kept morphing it. I kept changing, connecting it to other ideas, turning it into a sequence. And now, I couldn't play for 30 seconds without it showing up somewhere. And I think that's it. I love that about that. And I wanted to throw this little chapter in there, the Larry Coryell arpeggio, uh, coming from his first album. So it's about arpeggios, and there's a bunch of examples of it, but it's also a kind of a bigger lesson in that you can make a big things happen out of little small ideas if you are creative with it.
I think that's it. It's puts all this melodic potential at your fingertips with just some basic core structures. You take these 11 core arpeggios and you give us melodic minor sounds, harmonic minor sounds, diatonic sounds, modal sounds, quartal sound. And that if that sounds complicated, that's the idea, that it's all this complicated sounding stuff from simple stuff, from doable stuff, from a few shapes that you cover the shapes in the first few pages, and then it's just all the creative applications of it.
Yeah.
There's so much in it. If anyone has any questions, you can email me, luke@guitarvivo.com, and I'll answer any questions. There's another first. This is the only time I've actually written out the whole contents of the book on the sales page because I wanted people to see what was in it because there's such a wide range of stuff from like the chordal stacking. There's a lot of stuff in here. I'm passionate about this book a lot. I think it's going to be up there. I have a feeling we're going to be hearing about this for a few years. It's going to join the ranks of your other books, and I'm really very excited to have that kind of educational tome in our catalogue. So thank you, Don, for letting us publish it. Thank you so much for giving it to us.
Appreciate
Right, guys, everyone who's tuned in and signed up for this and stayed up late, or Brett, who's woken up early, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. There's nothing worse than starting at 8 a.m. on a Monday, and then having to play epic guitar licks first thing on a Monday morning. Thank you so much. I know Az is tuning in. He's like 3 a.m. there. Everyone who stayed for this, thank you all so much. Everyone who's bought the book, thank you. Brett and Don, thank you, and Tim as well. And got even people in the chat, Isaac, guys like that, who are giving up so much of what they've learned in themselves to help us mortals that want to try and play this thing. Thank you all so much for doing it and for being so open and putting yourselves out there. Brett, what's anything happening with you? Anything we need to look out for? Any albums or anything? Live shows?
I'm actually playing next weekend here in Melbourne. Excuse me, for the Melbourne Guitar Show with a wonderful guitar player named Paul Mason. We're doing a tribute show for Jeff Beck, so that'll be great fun. And I'm working on a legato book for Guitar Vivo, so yeah, that's to be looked for.
Yeah, finally, so that I can stop getting those emails every day. When's Brett doing a legato? But I think I've already had one today. I think someone in the chat said it. Oh, sorry, someone just asked, how do you buy the book? If you go to guitarvivo.com, Brett's book on hybrid picking is there, that beautiful book you see behind him, and two of Don's books, Arpeggio, Alchemy, and Mastering the Dominant Chord. Don, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today. I know this kind of stuff is stressful, and I wish you the best, and I can't wait to get a copy in your hands as well.
Yeah.
Get your feedback. Everyone who's signed up, you will get an email with a replay link. If you are on this live and you want to replay it, the email you've already got will take you to a page where you can watch on YouTube, and you can actually just rewatch it there, so you don't have to wait. You can start replaying it now. If you haven't had enough of us already, you can get straight back to the beginning and have the whole experience all over again. And yeah, that'll do it. Thank you all so much. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Go on, you, Luke. Thanks, mate. Thanks, Don.